The European Council discussed coordination in relation to the fight against COVID-19, and it should be self-evident that both at a European level and indeed at a national level we need an integrated approach and a properly resourced approach to combat COVID-19. I think it is worth dwelling on the fact that countries like Germany have managed better because they have a tremendously well-resourced, well-staffed, integrated National Health Service. And this contrasts with our fragmented, semi-privatised, understaffed, under-resourced service. And I just, in that relation, want to comment, because I know you were discussing coordination and contact tracing at the European Council. The debacle over contact tracing has, I think, everything to do with something that I highlighted last week, namely that the HSE are recruiting people on the worst possible temporary contracts. I want to fundamentally disagree with what Alan Kelly said today, that the solution to that is to separate contact tracing from the HSE when the opposite is necessary. We need an integrated, publicly run health service where workers in contact tracing and across the health service are paid properly as part of a single, well-resourced health service. Now, isn't that the problem? Isn't that the reason we don't have a contact tracing system, and indeed why our hospital frontline healthcare workers are overrun, why we've high infection rates, is because we do not have a properly staffed, properly looked after health staff, and we have this ridiculous situation where contact tracing, which is essential for us to be able to get on top of this disease, is outsourced on rubbishy contracts to workers in a fragmented, poorly organised system. That is the key, and we should move in the direction of paying those frontline workers, contact tracers and other frontline workers properly, giving them decent jobs, staffing things properly, resourcing the frontline services we need to challenge COVID.
Thank the deputies for the issues raised. First of all, this committee is the European Committee. We have a separate Cabinet subcommittee on COVID-19, which deals with all aspects of COVID. This committee meets to discuss broader European issues and also specifically in preparation for EU Council meetings. The most important response of the European Council and Member States to COVID-19 has been the multilateral financial framework and the Next Generation EU funding programme, which is unprecedented in that European Member States decided, on advice from the Commission, to act collectively to borrow money on the markets to support Member States who are under particular pressure as a result of COVID-19 and to underpin them. And that sort of solidarity manifests itself then in terms of giving resources to Member States to enable them to deliver on social solidarity in each of their Member States. Now, under the EU institutional rules, of course, this has to get the approval of Parliament, and there's a trilateral dialogue going on at the moment in relation to the Parliament and the Council and the Commission. And I've made a case that that needs to be accelerated. Parliament has its demands and objectives, and I would just say to members here who have members in the Parliament, the overriding consideration is to get this package through so that the funding can start being distributed and delivered to people to enable supports to be given to people. In Ireland, we're borrowing at low interest rates at the moment, very low interest rates. So, we're not necessarily dependent on the borrowing capacity that Europe has. These funds will have afforded us. Although on a separate fund, the SURE fund, we will utilise that, as the Minister for Finance has said, in respect of borrowing in support the pandemic unemployment payment and the wage subsidy payments, elements of that. That's the most fundamental response. On the COVID itself, the European response has been predominantly on the vaccine and the advanced purchase agreements, which I think is a good development, because in previous potential pandemics such as SARS, for example, and that Europe was not coordinated at all in terms of vaccine procurement. and was quite embryonic at that stage in developing that type of coordination. ECDC is providing a lot of advice to Europe. Europe is now has developed a proposal around coordination on travel, and also is looking at the area of as we discussed earlier, Deputy Murricu, on the testing technologies. Europe is now pursuing, can we get a coordinated approach to the various technologies that different member states are using in terms of testing? Most do PCR, but there's other tests, antigen and so on. And also then the quarantine frameworks that should apply. In terms of Germany, actually, I don't think I read a very interesting article on Germany on testing, but they actually have a network of private labs that they use for their testing. To say there's an overarching protocol, but actually it's a network of private labs across the entire country that has been utilised in terms of their testing regime. So your central thesis in terms of the health service doesn't apply in that context. And equally, I would say that in terms of treatments and in terms of outcomes, and I would ask you to defer to clinicians here, and we could bring in clinicians. The outcomes in Ireland in the first phase in terms of hospital treatments was quite good, which speaks well of the clinical qualities in our hospitals, the quality of our clinicians and all of our staff, nursing and all involved in intensive care. Like St. James's Hospital, for example, was looking at some of the metrics and that excellent programme that was done by RTE. In terms of outcomes, that should give us some reassurance. We can always attack our service, and there's endless kind of language around attacking and condemning and undermining it. There are some very, very bright spots in our health service as well. And the 1970 Health Act does afford people access to our acute hospital system. We have a lot of improvements to do, but we've put $4 billion into the health service this year to advance state services and the health service across the board, from home care to primary care to community care and to acute hospital care. And my ambition on the health front is that after the pandemic, that we will have put embedded improvements into the health service as a result of the additional resources that will be long-lasting and to the benefit of the citizens of the country in terms of availing of our health service. And I think that point has to be made. In terms of the contracts, I'm absolutely assured they're not zero-hour contracts. And we've made it clear they cannot be, and they have to be proper contracts. Because good quality people are being recruited here, and I think it's important that the job is done well, and that means that people who are recruited are looked after well, and that there's good HR policy, and that there's a good human resource environment for anybody who's recruited to the contact tracing positions and to the swabbing positions. We've been told it's not 0 hour, and I will further interrogate that to make sure that it's proper and to the level it should be. In terms of basically we're in a situation where we want to deal, and that is still the outcome that Europe wants, Ireland wants certainly, and the United Kingdom are saying they want, and therefore, notwithstanding all of the talk last week, the Joint Committee has been engaged, on the protocol issue. Still, there's been some constructive engagement there, and I would hope that a deal can be arrived at. In the context of a deal not being arrived at, Europe has significant decisions to make then in terms of contingency planning, and we have to be alive to that as well. I'm not going to go into specifics now, because I think it's part of it could influence, it could have an impact on the negotiation situation. It might be perceived in a certain way, but that there are realities that Europe will have to consider. What happens if we're in a no-deal scenario? What contingency plans do Europe apply, and in what form?
Should we debate that?
And I think we're in a negotiating process here, and I think let's first of all work on making sure we can bring them to the promised landing zone where they could potentially get to. In my view, having been appraised by Michel Barnier, I believe they can get to a proper landing zone, even on the key issues of a level playing field, governance and fishing. I do believe there's a lot of progress was made in earlier chapters of the negotiating process. On 4 others, considerable progress was made. So in my view, it's possible to get an agreement here. If we start talking about what happens in contingency, that might be seen the wrong way.
You raised it.
But we've made it there, we've put it on the record that that has to happen. You know.
Thank you. Taoiseach, question 2.
The programme for government sets out the government's commitment to working with all communities and traditions on the island to build consensus around a shared future, underpinned by the Good Friday Agreement. A shared island unit has been established in my department to support this work. The unit is led by an Assistant Secretary, and its work is proceeding to examine the considerations for a shared future in which all traditions are mutually respected, underpinned by the Good Friday Agreement. Operationally, the unit is focusing its work in 3 areas: commissioning research, fostering dialogue, and building a shared island agenda, including delivery of the commitments in the programme for government. The unit is developing a comprehensive research programme and will work with the Economic and Social Research Institute and other partners. North, South and East West collaboration will be an important part of this work. My department has also asked the National Economic and Social Council to prepare a comprehensive report on shared island issues in 2021. This will provide valuable input from economic, social and environmental partners. Tomorrow I will be launching an online shared island dialogue series that will start next month and inform the work of the unit. Strengthening social, economic and political links on the island and the promotion of all island approaches to the strategic challenges facing Ireland North and South are key objectives for this work. I have briefed British Prime Minister Boris Johnson on the Government's shared island commitments and made it clear that we are happy to develop East-West as well as North-South initiatives. In Budget 2021 last week, the Government announced a shared island fund with a planned $500 million to be made available out to 2025. The Shared Island Fund provides significant new multi-annual capital funding for investment on a strategic basis in collaborative North-South projects that will support the commitments and objectives of the Good Friday Agreement. The funding will foster new investment and development opportunities on a North-South basis and support the delivery of key cross-border infrastructure initiatives set out in the programme for government. It opens the way for investment in new all-island initiatives in quite a number of areas, particularly infrastructure will be the primary one, but also we look at research, health, education and the environment, and for addressing the particular challenges of the North West and border communities. It will also support our commitment to achieve greater connectivity on the island and to enhance the all-island economy and all aspects of North-South cooperation. The funding will be dispersed to departments and agencies in line with the programme for government priorities and on the basis of collaborative North-South projects. With regard to COVID-19, recognising that viruses know no borders, it was decided early on in advance of the establishment of the Shared Island Unit that cooperation between administrations would be instrumental in tackling the outbreak. Processes are in place for regular engagement to take place at ministerial, official and technical level. The Shared Island Unit has no involvement in the management of the COVID-19 pandemic. There has been significant engagement throughout the pandemic in relation to how each health system is implementing various public health responses. There has been long-standing close cooperation in the health area going back many years. The Memorandum of Understanding to strengthen North-South cooperation on the public health response to the COVID-19 pandemic agreed in April, copper-fastened and formalised this ongoing close cooperation.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
Taoiseach, People Before Profit was the only party in this House 2 weeks ago to explicitly support NEFIT's call to move to level 5, and we did so not because we like restrictions or lockdowns, we dislike them, but we support a zero COVID strategy which is based not on perennial lockdowns but is based on precisely trying to end the need for lockdowns by eliminating the virus. Now, the excuse you have given for not pursuing an elimination strategy which would present the possibility of getting out of perennial lockdowns, which is what your strategy is essentially offering us, is the issue of the border, the north. Now, I don't accept that excuse, to be honest with you. If places like Australia can pursue a zero COVID strategy quite effectively, I don't see why we can't. But I would like to know what concrete measures has the government taken to coordinate the COVID response? Really tangible, concrete measures to coordinate it in terms of contact tracing, in terms of testing, in terms of restriction levels, the timing of them and so on. And I note, by the way, countries like Wales now making decisions independent of Boris Johnson about restriction levels, which begs the question, are there others we should be talking to in Wales, in Scotland, indeed Britain themselves, to discuss the possibility of real coordination, which would open the possibility of pursuing an elimination strategy? And by the way, just don't mischaracterise it, because the elimination strategy is about getting rid of community transmission, which we almost had done in June, and then having a tracing regime that can pounce like a fire brigade on an outbreak of fire. Zero COVID is like zero fire. It doesn't mean you never have a fire, but the intention is never to have an uncontrolled fire. And then you've got a fire brigade that can jump on the odd outbreak. That's what zero COVID is about. So you don't have to have lockdowns. Now, that is a prize worth pursuing, in my mind, as an alternative to having lockdowns for the next year, and needs to be taken seriously on an all-Ireland basis.
Now, Taoiseach, just over 5 minutes to respond here.
Fine.
Really challenging task.
Thank you, Ceann Corlin, and thank the deputies for raising the issues with me. First of all, just in relation to, it was my initiative to secure 500 million additional and ring-fenced funding around the idea and for the Shared Ireland agenda. Because, as Deputy Holland raised this as a former minister, he would be aware that historically, through successive governments, not casting aspersions on any one government, but since the Good Friday Agreement was signed, we have done some projects, and also, in terms of canal and all of that. But other departments, if you give it just solely to the responsibility of a government department, they will always find other projects that will come ahead of maybe the North-South project or the idea of greater connectivity. Unfortunately, that's, I don't want to be too, but that seems to have been the reality. And then inevitably, if the design is slow or it's delayed, the projects in this space can fall victim to that process. So what we're clear here is this is additional 500 million. It is ring-fenced for Shared Ireland. Now, in terms of the projects, Deputy Marcoux and others, all deputies asked, we'll come back to other issues. There are obvious ones that are in the Good Friday Agreement itself, but also in the New Decade document as well. We've been committing to the A5 for a long time. It's time to deliver. Narrow Water Bridge is one such project that we will explore. The Ulster Canal, the cross-border greenways. Already in the July stimulus, we provided some initial funding for Sligo and Enniskillen Greenway. I think we could make a lot of quick progress on different greenways in different locations. We provided funding for the feasibility study on that Sligo and Enniskillen one. We will look at education area, the Northwest, and we haven't done a breakdown because I think it's wise, as we know from infrastructural projects. The worst thing sometimes you can do is just say, here's your 50 million, and then people go off designing the Taj Mahal and nothing ever happens. So this has to be done in a robust way with proper design, proper procurement and all of that to make sure that we can see a project being realised and delivered on the ground, and that the various local agencies and authorities are also playing their role in terms of forwarding, accelerating a project, and so that we can make the contribution when it matters. And it could be a contribution over 3 years, for example, as the project is being designed and developed. It puts flesh on the bone of the Shared Ireland concept. And connectivity is a key objective of this. So, for example, I can see us helping to fund the feasibility work on faster rail connectivity, north and south and between different cities, north and south. In terms of the oversight issue, the Department of Public Expenditure with the Department of Taoiseach will have oversight. Obviously, we will work with individual government departments and agencies in terms of delivery. And DEPA will obviously have a key oversight role as well. And in terms of references made by the House of Lords, and I think that's a very interesting presentation, and on the building relationships is key to this, and I would like to see deputies and senators and working through the Good Friday Committee and others to build different settings and different approaches where obviously the pandemic has restricted our movements and so on, but where there can be genuine engagement. I know Ceann Comhairle would have an interest in this as well, from Parliament to the Assembly, but nothing really can surpass good personal relationships and engagement, east, west and north, south. And I would see the Shared Island Unit endeavouring to facilitate that. Some would be at various centres like Corramelia and others, where you can have a no-holds-barred off-the-record session with people from different backgrounds, traditions and so on, to get to seek greater understanding. That is very important. In terms of, I think Deputy Howell asked about the special, we secured 120 million from the European package, which is very good news, because of course that has to be more than matched by the British government, and I think it's 2 to 1, 3 to 1. We'll work on the higher number, and we have to match it as well. So that actually gets us very substantial funding now, which will be organised separately from this. Okay, separate accountancy and approach and all of that. And we're very pleased with the Commission for doing that, and Ursula von der Leyen in particular for being facilitative in relation to that. On the pandemic issues that quite a number of deputies have raised, there has been concrete engagement between first of all, the CMOs. There's been a memorandum of understanding signed by the 2 chief medical officers. The 2 ministers for health have engaged, Robin Swan and Stephen Donnelly. I've engaged consistently with the First Minister and Deputy First Minister, and will continue to do so, and with other party leaders in the North. But we are conscious we are in 2 jurisdictions. It is not New Zealand. It's nebulous. Whether we like it or not, it's not New Zealand. Ireland is not New Zealand. Our geography is different. It's quite substantially different. And whether we like it or not, there are 2 separate jurisdictions on the island operating, an executive and assembly, the government here and the Oireachtas. Those are realities. We have a long border. I don't think it's possible to seal the border, Deputy. Just don't think it is in terms of the zero COVID strategy. I think it was interesting on concrete stuff, which wasn't nebulous, in relation to when we had our problems in Donegal and moved Donegal to level 3. I approached the First Minister, Arlene Foster, and Michelle O'Neill, Deputy First Minister. They responded in their way, pragmatically, in terms of Derry and Strabane. And as I instanced this morning, the CMO there is saying that there seems to be an impact there in Derry Strabane in terms of numbers coming down somewhat. I hope that is the case and that sustains. So the cooperation, we'll do everything we can to cooperate, but there are limitations to it as well. They had challenges in getting to level 3 last week, or level 3 plus, maybe, in terms of some of the measures they took. Politically, within the executive, there was discussion, robust discussion, put it that way. I contacted both the First Minister and Deputy First Minister in relation to it again, because conscious that we were moving to a higher level, and particularly in Donegal and Cavan and Monaghan, and then that we would be looking at nationally, but they have to operate within their political constraints and political realities.
All right, Taoiseach, I'm sorry, but we're
just to say that
time.
Minister Simon Coveney has been very proactive as well with all of the Northern parties in terms of the cooperation around the pandemic, to be fair to him, and has had a number of meetings with Stephen Donnelly and the respective ministers. I think Deputy MacDonald had the British Irish Council. We want to participate in that. The whole area of travel has been challenging because public health has never been, in the early days, enthusiastic about travel. We are now in a situation where Europe is developing a common travel arrangement. And Minister Coveney and Michael Gove have been in discussions in terms of the British-Irish situation, but all of that is subject to agreement from the health authorities as well in terms of what's safe and not safe.
Question 5 or question 7? Sorry, please. Do you want to spend the 5 minutes on this? Are members amenable to spend, and question 7 will remain for the next day?
Well, there is no next day.
There is no next day. Okay, we go on to question 7.
I attended the meeting of the European Council in Brussels on the 15th to 16th of October. The agenda included Brexit, COVID-19, climate action, European relations with Africa, and a number of external relations issues. On Brexit, European Union Chief Negotiator Michel Barnier shared his assessment of the state of play in the negotiations. While recalling our determination to have as close as possible a partnership with the United Kingdom, the European Council noted that further progress is needed on a number of key issues, in particular the level playing field, governance and fisheries, if agreement is to be achieved. I was joined by a number of other leaders in insisting on the importance of a fair and balanced outcome on fisheries to our fishing enterprises and our coastal communities. There was also agreement on the need for full and timely implementation of the withdrawal agreement, including the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland. On COVID-19, we agreed that the current epidemiological situation gives rise to very serious concerns. In welcoming progress on better coordination of travel within the European Union, we called for stronger coordination in areas including quarantine, cross-border contact tracing, testing strategies and the mutual recognition of tests. We also welcomed ongoing work on the development and distribution of vaccines. We held a positive exchange on climate action and will return to this issue at our meeting in December. I expressed the Government's support for the Commission's proposal for increased ambition at European Union level, including setting a target of at least 55% reduction in carbon by 2030. On Friday, we held a strategic discussion on Africa in preparation for the European Union-African Union Summit planned for 2021. We touched on the situation in Belarus and the shooting down of flight MH17 and separately on the European Union's relationship with our southern neighbourhood. We discussed Turkey and condemned recent provocative maritime activity by Turkey in the eastern Mediterranean. We will return to this issue at future meetings. In addition to attending the meeting of the European Council, I also had a bilateral meeting with President Macron of France. This focused in particular on Brexit, including our shared determination to secure a fair and balanced outcome on fish and on COVID-19 in France and Ireland.
For earlier discussion, because as you said, you discussed the European-wide response to COVID-19 and specifically the contact tracing cross-border, and obviously that brings us to the topical discussion of the state of our contact tracing system. And I did mention contact tracing, so the reference to private German labs is a bit of a deflection, to be honest, because yes, there are, because there's a big
virtues of a national health service in Germany.
There's a big private pharmaceutical industry, accepted, and they utilise their labs, sure. But there is also a state-of-the-art public health apparatus, something we do not have, okay? We have run down our public health apparatus, and what is a particular strength of the German system is its local, the strength of its local public health apparatus and its tracing regime, right? And that is what you need. Similar success has been achieved in New Zealand, Australia and so on, because of the strength of local public health. People with on-the-ground knowledge, with the resources, with the respect, which our public health specialists do not have, by the way, because they're not on the same status as other medical specialists, and the resourcing to back it up. Not people on miserable contracts. And by the way, I have the contract in front of me. It was a 0-hour contract. Not a shadow of a doubt. Right? It's littered with, we can get rid of you, we don't have to pay you in this instance, and so on, right? And then they scrambled, because I embarrassed them last week, because I was tipped off by somebody on one of these contracts, absolutely disgusted. Somebody with a postgraduate degree being treated like this. No wonder you can't get contract tracers if these are the contracts you hand them. And then the suggestion we should siphon it off from the HSE, even worse, by Alan Kelly today. Madness. They need direct employment by the HSE on proper contracts to build up strong public health teams at a local level, which is what they have in Germany. And I wonder, was there any detailed discussion about that kind of thing? Because that's what we need if we're going to get ahead of this virus. Elimination strategy or suppression. David Navarro was clear. So was Tony Holohan at the briefing. We had to have that public health apparatus to have a chance of not being rolling in and out of restriction after restriction, time after time. That's the point, Taoiseach. And I'm wondering, did you learn anything from our European colleagues in that regard?
That concludes Taoiseach's questions. Well, I'm sorry, people have talked on the clock, so we'll take a sus now for 1 hour. Thank you.